What's up, everybody? Welcome back. We are in our first week of our new cycle, the Reprieve, Reckon, and Respite cycle. Hopefully, you had a chance to look at the video that I posted last week. That was more of a broad overview of the cycle and kind of talking about the physiology that we're targeting and what to expect with each week. We'll walk through this week today, talking about the specific days, kind of how to approach them, things to think about. But yeah. As I mentioned in the last video, this is a pretty difficult cycle. It's going to push you because what we're doing is trying to improve your body's ability to process glucose or glycogen, and we might see some fiber type changing as well. So it's going to be relatively uncomfortable on some days, but there are some days that will be even more comfortable because the other days are so difficult. So let's dive into it. This week, we are starting off with our Reprieve day. And in the notes, I kind of put a condensed version of what the video talked about last week in case you did miss it or you didn't have the time to sit down and watch it. But what we're doing here is on these days, each week we're taking this first day, this Reprieve day, to kind of set the standard for that week. This week, we're doing 8 bouts. 1 minute on, 2 minutes off. I saw in the Discord, people were asking, what do you do during your off? You can do whatever you want. You can truly rest, just, vegetative rest, not move at all. Or you can do some active recovery or a mix of both, right? If you have 2 minutes of recovery interval, let's say you just sit there for 30 seconds. This is actually kind of my strategy, what I like to do. I do a lot of my work on the bike erg. So I'll do the interval on the bike. And then if I have like 2 minutes rest, I'll take the first 30 seconds. I'll actually get fully horizontal on the ground to help me recover. So by doing that, by going horizontal, you put everything on the same plane, your body doesn't have to work as hard to pump blood. So it's just a little physiological trick. So I usually lay down for about 30 seconds, kind of let my heart rate come back down, get control of my breathing, and then I'll get back up and just slowly pedal on the bike. During my work intervals, I pedal somewhere around like 85, 90 RPMs. During the recovery intervals, I might be at like 40 RPMs, right? Nothing too terrible, just enough to help, again, move that blood around, kind of flush. I don't really like the word flush, but flush the metabolites out of the muscle and things like that. So 8 rounds, 1 minute on, 2 minutes off. In your recovery, in the off, you can do, whatever you'd like. During the on intervals, the kind of thought process on these Reprieve days, similar to the W prime, we're trying to maximize the amount of work we're doing in there. Will we see a drop off? Certainly. Do we want to treat this truly like a W prime? Well, it's not quite a full-on W prime where you're coming out the gates as maximal as possible, but it should be pretty hard. It should be definitely non-sustainable. So 1 minute should feel pretty difficult. You definitely should not be going at an intensity that you could do for, say, 2 minutes, right? You want to be pushing it pretty hard. And so you're going to do that across all 8 rounds. And like I said, that's going to serve as kind of the standard, and we'll talk about where that shows up later this week. In the notes I put this, but I would really recommend not running these days, especially if you are not a seasoned runner. Simply because when we're running, there's a lot more biomechanical issues we can run into as we fatigue. And what we call your economy, or essentially your ability to minimize the amount of energy needed to move, will tank. As your biomechanics break down, it becomes harder to run. And so it's going to become pretty taxing. So I like using the bike or some kind of erg on these days. I saw Arash was in the Discord talking about using the ski erg. Ski erg's great. I think it's actually a pretty underutilized machine. But I like the non-weight bearing ergs because, again, the biomechanics tend not to break down nearly as much. But if you're a seasoned runner and you would like to run, it's in there. There's the option for it. But typically I like to prefer on these days to use one of the ergs. So that'll be Monday, 8 rounds, 8 total minutes of work. Not so bad, right? But you're going to be pushing pretty intensely during that. Coming off of that, on Tuesday, we have a high-low day. So if you're in last cycle, you know what this is all about. If you're new, these high-low days I like to think about as truly building our ability to actively recover. When we think about sports such as open field sports like rugby, soccer, lacrosse, field hockey, or when we think about things like grappling or these sports where there's never really a downtime, there's more like a burst of high energy and then kind of a lower gear for a while. That's what I think about with these high-low days. So our ability to actively recover, meaning to actually be moving at a decent intensity and still be able to bring the heart rate back down and bring some composure back. So on our high-low days, what we do is we have a longer bout. So this week we're going 24 minutes, and then interspersed throughout that bout, we have 7-second bursts of sprinting. So for this week, we have at 5, 10, 15, and 20 minutes, we are going to do our 7-second sprint. That's a true sprint. Hammer it down. Now, we're not so concerned about how much work you do in that sprint. We just want a maximal effort there, because what we're trying to do is deliver a very acute dose of very high intensity, and then having our body have to work to actively bring the heart rate back down, actively get control of our breathing, and learn to process against some of those metabolites that come from sprinting. So it's also very important, if you notice 5, 10, 15, 20, well, if we're sprinting there, but it's a 24-minute bout, that means there's 4 minutes there at the end where we're back on that lower intensity pace. And that pace during those lower intensity sections should be the same pace that you got from the 30-minute test that we did last week. That's considered our endurance pace. We want to be operating there during those 4-minute bouts or 5-minute bouts in between the sprints, right? So on the sprint, you hammer it. And then during those lower intensity bouts, we're trying to hold our endurance pace. And oftentimes what happens, for those of you who haven't done this, you will come off that sprint and you'll kind of dip too low and then have to work yourself back up. We really want to try and get right back to that endurance pace. So the sooner you can get there, the better, because that endurance pace, if we were to put it in like our zones, if you will, that's like somewhere around like zone 3. So our body is actually most capable of processing those metabolites in that energy system, just because of what's going on under the hood. So it's a nice place to be, but it can be difficult to get back there. But these days, if you want to run them, I actually think running is a pretty good thing to do here, because my biomechanics shouldn't break down too much. And again, especially if you're in those sports that I listed, that's going to be a direct correlation, right? You're on your feet, you're actually moving, you're actually bearing weight and having to recover. So if you want to run for this, that's great. But as always, the ergs are there and never a bad option. So Monday, Tuesday, going to Wednesday, this is our reckon day. So we just did a 10-minute test last week, our classic 10-minute test. You can think of our reckon days as kind of an extension of that. This week, we're going 15 minutes. So what I want you to do is think about trying to get as much work done in that 15 minutes as possible. So you're trying to pace it as a 15-minute piece. That means not coming out too hot, right? It's not a full sprint right out the gates, but it is a heavy, heavy, heavy push the entire time. Depending on where your fitness is, at about 5 minutes, your body might be saying like, hey, buddy, let's back off a little bit, right? If you're a little bit fitter, a little bit more conditioned to this, maybe that gets pushed back to like 7, 8, 9 minutes. But the last 5 minutes for sure, as I mentioned in the notes, the alarm should be going off. Your body should be like, man, we are working right now. This is tough. And so you want to ideally pace it for exactly 15 minutes. But if you burn out a little bit too soon, that's okay, right? Commit that to memory, understand like, okay, this pace was maybe a little bit too hot. And if you finish it and you're, I don't want to say like completely wrecked, because it's going to be metabolic. You're not going to feel like exhausted you will feel exhausted, but you're not going to feel like CNS wiped out. But metabolically, if you're able to get off the bike or whatever mode you're using and kind of just carry on right afterwards, you probably didn't push hard enough. And so these first couple of weeks on these reckon days, you're going to learn how to dial it in. Because like I said, we had our 10-minute test, so you can look at that as a reference. And we also have our 30-minute test that you can look at as a reference as well to try and find these paces in between. But it'll be a little trial and error. The good news is, even if you undershoot, it's not like the work wasn't done. If you overshoot and burn out, the same thing, right? The work's being done, so don't beat yourself up too much. But the idea over the course of the next 12 weeks is on these days, you start to hone in and say, okay, this is exactly where I can be for these time domains, right? So then you can carry it over to whatever sport you're in, because 15 minutes of high intensity work is 15 minutes of high intensity work. Now, if that's on the field or the mats or something like that, it obviously looks different, but that time domain in terms of energy systems, that's really how our body operates. So kind of building that internal governor for yourself to know, like, hey, I got 10 minutes or I got 15 minutes, I can push this hard, right? So that's our Wednesday. That's our Reckon Day. And then we go into our Respite Day on Thursday. So this is the big monster of the week, right? Whenever our Respite Day comes around, because the nature of this is we go back to that Reprieve Day that set the standard. How much work can we get done in this interval? So again, we had 8 1-minute intervals there. On our Respite Day, we also have 8 1-minute intervals, but now we are taking the rest down. So we're only doing 1 minute of rest. So this is, if you saw the video before, this is failure by design. I'm expecting you guys to fail on this in terms of not being able to hit that pace anymore, but that's the stress that we need to apply to our body to get the adaptation, right? If you find yourself on this day, especially this first week, being able to hold that pace from your Reprieve Day with no issue, you probably didn't go hard enough on Monday, right? So you can kind of commit that to memory. You should have a maybe 1 or 2 intervals you should be able to recover, but definitely in the back half somewhere, 4, 5, 6, 7, those recovery intervals should definitely not be enough to get back on fully recovered, right? So it's failure by design, but only meaning failure to meet the pace. It's not a failure if you fall off. That's the intention. That's the stimulus that we're driving. We're forcing your body to fail because that's the stress that signals to your body to say, hey, we are not prepared for this type of work. We need to make some changes internally to get ourselves there. Now, I also mentioned in the video, there's a couple different ways to approach this. Depending on the day, right, or depending on the week, really, because this is on Thursday, a lot of stuff can happen. You can be extra fatigued, maybe you got poor sleep, maybe it was a rough week, maybe nutritionally you've been off, all those things. And so we can look at this one of two ways. You can take a direct 1-for-1 from your Reprieve Day. So let's say in 1 minute, you're able to hold, we'll say 350 watts, right? Well, then you can aim to hold 350 watts on these days. That's totally fine, right? That's the 1-for-1. But much like with strength training, we can also add what we call like our training max to this. So in strength training, our training max is usually like 90% of our true max. So if I'm doing, if I can back squat 400 pounds, right? My training max is like 90% of that. So I use 360 pounds for all my percentage work, just knowing that there's a 10% variance, right? Poor sleep, poor nutrition, all that stuff. We can do the same thing here. So if you held 350 watts on the first day, you can try and hold 350 watts here, or you could say, I'm going to try and hold a range between 315 to 350 watts, right? So that gives you that like 10% wiggle room. If you find yourself falling below that 90%, right? If you find yourself in this case falling below 350 watts for the majority of an interval, right? You might peter off a little bit at the end and I wouldn't call it a miss, but if you just have a hard time getting there at all during that interval, that would be the failure point, right? That would be the interval in which you fail. And there's two options there. One, you miss and you can give a self-assessment and say, man, I am just fried today. I'm like running through quicksand right now. If it's one of those days, you're probably good. You can probably walk away, or you can continue the rest of the intervals at like a very low intensity to just try and drive recovery. But if you're kind of like me where it's like, man, if it's written, I got to do it, take an extra minute rest there. So let's say intervals 1 through 4, we're able to stay within the range. Interval 5, My range is 315 to 350 watts. I have a hard time getting up to 300 watts throughout the entire interval, so I missed. Instead of just doing 1 minute of rest, I'm going to stretch that interval to 2 minutes of rest. Again, trying to help give us just a little bit more juice, a little bit more gas in the tank, so then we can hit those next ones where we're supposed to be. If you struggle to hit those next ones, just cut it, right? Because there's no point. You're digging yourself in a hole. You've gotten the intended stimulus already, right? So in terms of failure, yes, you failed to meet your ideal intensity, but in terms of accomplishment, you accomplished the goal. You have done everything you needed to do to make sure that you maximize those stress. So don't get in your head too much about this. Don't get too negative, because again, I've set it up so it's going to be difficult and you will miss your range at some point. It's just how it goes, right? This is physiological stress. This is how we adapt. But if you do start feeling pretty beat up about yourself, just hop in the Discord, start chatter, and you'll find that everybody else is having a hard time. I'm sure however you feel is nowhere near how angry or depressed or defeated that David McKercher will feel. So, it's okay. And then we end the week with our aerobic power day. And so this is both mentally and physically, I think, a really nice way to end this first week. Physically, aerobic power days, if you've done them before, you kind of walk away feeling pretty refreshed, right? You're like, man, I did some stuff, but I feel pretty good. Because the intensity that we're looking at there is nowhere near as high as our Reprieve and Reckon and Respite days. But we're still getting our heart rate up there. So again, if you're using like a heart rate monitor, kind of shooting for like 85% of your heart rate max by the end of these. Depending how fit you are, it might take a little while to get up there. But this week, we're going 5 rounds, 3 minutes on, 1 minute off. Again, the Reprieve, Respite, and Reckon days, I like to do on a non-weight-bearing erg, but the high-low and the aerobic power, absolutely, if you want to run these are great days to run. But yeah, the 80 to 85% range is kind of what we're aiming for. 5 rounds, 3 minutes on, 1 minute off. Again, in that off period, do whatever you want, with the intention of getting control of your heart rate, getting control of your breathing, right? When we talk about controlling our breathing, there's like a hierarchy of steps that I like to go through. So when you're done, maybe not on the aerobic power day, but we'll say definitely on the Reprieve and Respite days. When you're done with the interval, hyperventilating, right? Probably breathing through the mouth a lot. The immediate shift that I want you to try and make is a big breath inhale through the nose and then blow it out the mouth, right? That's the first step to kind of getting control of your breathing. Airflow is slower going through the nose. The holes are smaller. So that's going to force you to kind of down regulate a little bit, but you can still breathe out your mouth because we're trying to breathe off a whole bunch of carbon dioxide, right? So we can breathe out big breaths, but we want to inhale a big breath through the nose. It's naturally going to be a little slower. And then I like to give myself 5. So I give myself 5 breaths of doing it that way, big through the nose, out through the mouth. And after 5 breaths, I try and do everything through the nose, right? It might be a little uncomfortable at first. You might still feel a little gaspy. But again, the whole idea is building these strategies to force ourselves to recover, right? So getting control of your breath looks like that. You'll see that your heart rate will follow. But yeah, the aerobic power day is a great way to end the week. You should feel pretty good coming away from that. A little sweaty, a little breathy, and everything should be fine. Now, with all of that, since we're doing a lot of this high intensity stuff, you guys want to leverage nutrition on this, especially regarding the Reprieve, Reckon, and Respite days, because those days are essentially glycogen depletion days, meaning that we're taking as many of our stored carbohydrates out of the picture as possible. So in order to not feel like a slug for the rest of the week, you'll want to replenish with carbohydrate. It's probably not a bad idea to have a little bit of a carb drink to sip on during these intervals. That's kind of a buyer beware type of thing, knowing you got to know yourself, how you handle having stuff in your stomach during really high intensity. I tend to not have an issue with it, probably from years of swimming. I just got used to having food or fluids in my gut while doing this stuff. If you are somebody who maybe makes you a little bit queasy, err on the side of less, but we still want to try and train that in there because that's going to give us the fuel right away, right? Our body's going to be able to get that. But if you're not doing anything during, for sure, afterwards, you want to replenish some of those carbs. Typically, I like to tell people around 60 to 70% of your carbs should come around your training, depending how many training sessions you have a day and things like that. So be sure to stay on top of your carbs. Obviously, if you're trying to lose weight and things like that, you have your macros that you have to fit within. But if you're not trying to lose weight, if you're trying to just optimize performance, you can be anywhere up 400 to 600 grams of carbs a day, and be crushing it. So think about that. Try and make sure that you're getting your nutrition in. Otherwise, if you want to dive down the role of supplements, this cycle, beta alanine. If you want to get on beta alanine, like 6 grams a day. I every day will put together some beetroot juice, beetroot powder, that is, and make a drink out of that. That's going to help with kind of the aerobic side of things. So beta alanine, beetroot, probably are the 2 supplements I would say to go for here. But yeah, week 1, it's going to be a fun one. I promise. Misery loves company, shared suffering, all that kind of stuff. Use the Discord if you need it, if you got any questions. And otherwise, I'm looking forward to seeing how you guys do.